On October 2, 1861, a fire consumed the records office in Red Hollow Parish, Louisiana. Officials ruled it accidental, a lightning strike during an unseasonable storm that spread too quickly to contain. But among the debris, workers found something that didn't fit the story: chains bolted into the subfloor beneath what had once been a storage room, and remnants of ledgers that had been deliberately torn apart before the flames ever touched them. Most of the parish records between 1858 and 1861 vanished that night. Property transfers, slave registries, birth records, all gone. And with them, any official trace of a place called Blackwater House, and of the three people whose lives had been bound together there in ways no law would ever acknowledge. What remains has been reconstructed from fragments, letters smuggled north, a physician's journal discovered decades later, and testimony recorded by a small abolitionist circle in Boston, sealed until the early 20th century. The story begins not with the fire, but with a purchase. In the spring of 1858, along the muddy banks of the Mississippi just outside Baton Rouge, a girl named Eliza was sold at auction. She was 16. The trader described her as healthy, obedient, and of uncommon composure. He noted her literacy with a hint of suspicion, but framed it as a useful trait for household duties. No mention was made of how she had learned to read, or why her previous owner had died suddenly under circumstances no one chose to investigate too closely. She stood straight while the men inspected her, her eyes steady, her hands still. Most buyers passed her over, until the Whitlock brothers arrived. Nathaniel and Edward Whitlock were identical twins, 27 years old, recently returned from Virginia after inheriting their family's Louisiana estate. Blackwater House sat deep in cypress country, surrounded by swampland that swallowed sound and discouraged visitors. The brothers had a reputation already: quiet, educated, reclusive. They rarely attended social gatherings, conducted most business through intermediaries, and kept to themselves in a way that made even other planters uneasy. They bid higher than necessary. Eliza noticed that immediately. Men who overpaid either didn't understand value or didn't care about it. Neither possibility reassured her. The journey to Blackwater took 2 days by wagon and another by flatboat. No one spoke to her beyond basic instructions. When they arrived, she saw a house larger than any she'd known: 3 stories, shuttered windows, paint fading but structure intact. Behind it, the quarters were smaller than expected for a property of its size. Fewer people. That was the first thing she noticed. The second was the silence. No singing, no voices carrying across the yard. Even the wind seemed to move differently there, as if the land itself resisted disturbance. She was taken not to the quarters, but to the main house. That was the third thing. Nathaniel Whitlock stood in the foyer when she entered, hands clasped behind his back. Edward leaned against the staircase railing, watching with a faint smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You can read," Nathaniel said. It wasn't a question. "Yes, sir." Edward laughed softly. "Polite, too, that's something." Eliza kept her gaze lowered, but she was already studying them, the way they moved in near-perfect sync. The subtle differences: Nathaniel's posture more rigid, Edward's more relaxed, almost careless, but their eyes were the same, sharp, observing, calculating. "You'll stay here," Nathaniel said. "Not in the quarters." That wasn't kindness, she knew that. It was selection. For what purpose? She asked before she could stop herself. Edward's smile widened. "She asks questions." Nathaniel didn't smile. "You'll understand soon enough." They gave her a room on the second floor, small but clean, with a narrow bed and a window overlooking the swamp. A lock was installed on the outside of the door before nightfall. Eliza didn't sleep, she listened. Footsteps moved through the house long after midnight, voices low, indistinct. Once she heard something else, a cry cut short. Morning came heavy and humid. She was summoned to the study. Books lined the walls: medical texts, agricultural journals, volumes in Latin she couldn't fully decipher. Papers covered the desk in precise stacks. Nathaniel stood there writing. Edward sat nearby, flipping through a notebook. "Come here," Edward said. She stepped forward. Nathaniel didn't look up. "We value order here, precision, understanding. You'll be expected to learn quickly." "Learn what?" This time Nathaniel did look at her. "Your place." Edward closed the notebook. "And your purpose." Days passed in controlled routine. Eliza was not sent to field work. Instead, she was assigned tasks inside the house: cleaning, organizing, copying passages from books under Nathaniel's supervision. They tested her constantly. Memory exercises, reading comprehension, simple arithmetic. Questions designed not just to measure intelligence but obedience. And always they watched, not casually, intently, like scientists observing a specimen. she began to notice patterns. The brothers recorded everything. Not just crops or finances, but people. The few enslaved individuals on the property were listed in ledgers with notes beside their names, physical traits, behaviors, health conditions. Even emotional responses described in detached clinical language. Eliza found the first ledger by accident, or what appeared to be an accident. Edward left it open on the desk while stepping out of the room. She hesitated only a moment before looking. Her name was already there. Eliza, approx. 16, literate, displays composure under scrutiny, potential high-value subject. Subject, not person. She closed the book just as Edward returned. He didn't ask if she'd read it. He didn't need to. Curiosity can be useful, he said lightly. Or dangerous. Which is it here? She asked. His smile faded slightly. That depends on you. That night she didn't wait for sleep. She searched. Quietly, methodically, she explored what she could of the house. Doors were locked, windows latched, but on the ground floor, behind the kitchen, she found a narrow hallway leading to a cellar. The door was unlocked, that was the fourth thing. Inside, the air was damp and cold. The space below was larger than expected, divided into sections by wooden partitions, some empty, some not. She heard breathing before she saw the figure. A woman older sitting against the wall, wrists bound loosely with rope. Her eyes widened when she saw Eliza. Go back, the woman whispered. You shouldn't be here. What is this place? An experiment, the woman said bitterly. And we're part of it, footsteps sounded above. Eliza turned, heart pounding. The door opened. Nathaniel stood there, lantern in hand. For a moment no one spoke, then he stepped inside. You're not where you're supposed to be. Eliza met his gaze. And you're not what you pretend to be. Something shifted in his expression, not anger, not surprise, something closer to interest. Edward appeared behind him, looking between them. Well, he said softly, this is sooner than expected. Nathaniel turned back to Eliza. I suppose introductions are in order. He gestured to the cellar. This is where we conduct our work. What work? Edward answered this time. Understanding. He stepped closer, his voice almost gentle. The world is changing, Eliza, old systems breaking down. We intend to understand what makes people what they are, what can be shaped, improved, controlled. Eliza felt a chill that had nothing to do with the damp air. And me, she asked. Nathaniel's gaze didn't waver. You're part of that understanding. The woman behind her shook her head slightly, a silent warning. Eliza ignored it. I'm not a thing to be studied. Edward smiled again, but there was no warmth in it. No, he said, you're something much more valuable. Nathaniel stepped forward, close enough that she could see the fine lines at the corners of his eyes. You're proof of what, that control, he said quietly, is stronger than will. The words settled heavily between them. Eliza understood then. This wasn't just about observation. It was about breaking something and reshaping it. She looked from one brother to the other. Identical faces, identical intent, different methods. Nathaniel was rigid, methodical, precise. Edward was fluid, manipulative, patient. Together, they were something worse than either alone. Eliza straightened. If you think I'll let you, Nathaniel interrupted her with a raised hand. You misunderstand. His voice was calm. We don't require your permission. Edward leaned in slightly. But your cooperation, he added, would make things much easier. Eliza said nothing. She didn't need to. They had already decided her role. The only question left was how she would survive it. Upstairs, the house remained silent. Outside, the swamp swallowed every sound. And below, in the dim light of the cellar, the first lines of a story that would later be burned, buried, and nearly erased were being written, one decision at a time. The days after the cellar discovery did not explode into violence the way Eliza had expected. That unsettled her more than anything. There was no punishment, no immediate escalation. Instead, the Whitlock brothers adjusted, quietly, precisely, like men recalibrating an experiment that had produced an unexpected result. Her door was no longer locked at night. That was deliberate. Freedom, when granted suddenly, wasn't freedom at all. It was observation, a test of what she would do with the illusion of choice. Eliza understood that, so she did nothing. She followed routines, completed tasks, spoke only when addressed. She made herself predictable, even as she watched everything with sharper attention than before. Nathaniel increased her time in the study. Edward increased his time watching her. They never spoke of the cellar again, but its presence hovered over every interaction like a shadow that refused to move with the light. You learn quickly, Nathaniel said one afternoon as she copied passages from a medical text. The words described nervous system responses, how the body reacted to pain, fear, repeated stimuli. Eliza didn't look up. I had good teachers. Before us, he said. Yes. Edward leaned against the window, arms crossed. And did they teach you obedience? Eliza paused just long enough to make the answer feel considered. They taught me survival. Edward smiled faintly. Those aren't always the same thing. No, she said quietly. But they overlap. Nathaniel set down his pen. That depends on the system you're in. Eliza met his gaze, and who built it? A silence followed, not tense, measured. Nathaniel seemed almost satisfied. Edward looked amused. That was when she realized something dangerous. They wanted resistance, not open defiance that would be crushed, but controlled resistance. Something they could study, shape, respond to. She wasn't meant to break quickly. She was meant to last. That night she returned to the cellar. This time she didn't hesitate. The woman she'd seen before was still there. So were two others she hadn't noticed in the shadows, one young, barely older than Eliza, and one man with a limp who watched everything without speaking. You came back, the older woman said. I needed to understand, Eliza replied. The woman gave a short, humorless laugh. That's how it starts. What are they doing here? Eliza asked. The younger girl answered this time. They change things. Routines, food, sleep, questions, always questions. The man spoke without looking at her. They watch how you react, then they change it again. How long? Eliza asked. Months, the woman said, maybe longer. Time moves strange down here. Why you? Eliza asked. The woman hesitated then. Because I argued. The girl shook her head. Because she remembered things they didn't like. Eliza looked at the man. He finally met her gaze. Because I stopped reacting. That answer stayed with her. Upstairs, she had noticed the same pattern. Those who resisted openly were isolated. Those who complied completely were discarded. But those who existed in between, aware, responsive, controlled, those were the ones the brothers focused on, like her. Do they hurt you? She asked quietly. The woman gave a long look. Not always where you can see. Footsteps sounded above again. Eliza stiffened. Go, the man said. If they find you twice, it won't be the same. She didn't argue. When she reached the top of the stairs, Edward was waiting. Of course he was. You're consistent, he said lightly. Eliza didn't flinch this time. So are you. He tilted his head. And what pattern have you found in me? That you already know the answer to anything you ask. Edward smiled slowly. Good, he said, then we can stop pretending this is accidental. Nathaniel appeared behind him. Come upstairs, he said. No anger, no urgency. That was worse. In the study, the atmosphere had changed. The ledgers were open. Multiple pages filled with notes, her name repeated more than once. Nathaniel gestured to the chair across from him. Sit, she did. Edward remained standing, circling slowly, like a presence rather than a person. You've demonstrated initiative, Nathaniel said, curiosity, pattern recognition. Eliza said nothing. These are valuable traits, he continued, but they require direction. From you, she said. Yes, she held his gaze. And if I refuse, Edward answered before Nathaniel could. You won't. Eliza turned to him. You seem very certain. I am. Why? Edward stepped closer, his voice lowering. Because you've already started adapting. He wasn't wrong. That was the problem. Nathaniel pushed one of the ledgers toward her. Read. She hesitated, then looked down. The page described her behavior over the past week. Sleep patterns, speech frequency, emotional responses or lack of them. At the bottom, a line written in sharper ink. Subject demonstrates controlled resistance. Optimal balance between defiance and compliance. Continue observation. Eliza felt something tighten in her chest, not fear, recognition. They weren't just watching her, they were defining her. You reduce people to this, she asked quietly. Nathaniel didn't blink. We record what is observable. You decide what matters. Yes. Edward leaned on the desk beside her. And you're helping us refine that. Eliza closed the ledger. I'm not helping you. Nathaniel's expression didn't change, but you are participating. That's not the same. No, he agreed. It's more useful. Silence settled again. Then Nathaniel did something unexpected. He closed the other ledgers. For now, he said, we change the structure. Eliza looked up. How? You'll continue your work here, he said. But you'll also assist in the cellar. Her stomach tightened. No, it came out before she could stop it. Edward watched her closely. There it is, he murmured. Nathaniel folded his hands. You've seen it already. You understand more than the others. That makes you valuable. I won't be part of what you're doing down there. Nathaniel's gaze hardened slightly, not anger, but resistance meeting resistance. You already are. No, she said, louder now. Watching isn't the same as intervening, Edward finished softly. Influencing outcomes, helping us understand how one subject affects another. Eliza stood abruptly. I won't do it. For a moment, no one moved. Then Nathaniel stood as well. He was taller than she remembered. Sit down, he said. She didn't. Edward's voice came from behind her. You're making this harder than it needs to be. Eliza turned sharply. For who? For you. Nathaniel stepped closer. You believe this is about choice, he said. It isn't, it's about inevitability. Eliza shook her head. Nothing about this is inevitable. Nathaniel studied her for a long moment, then quietly. Bring her down. It took her a second to understand. Who? She asked. Edward moved toward the door. The girl, he said. Eliza's stomach dropped. No, but it was already happening. Minutes later, the younger girl from the cellar was brought into the study, wrists bound, eyes wide with confusion. She looked at Eliza first, not the brothers. Eliza felt something shift inside her. Sharp, immediate. Nathaniel spoke calmly. You have influence, he said. We've observed it. I don't. You do, Edward interrupted. They listen to you differently. Eliza looked at the girl, then back at them. What are you asking? Nathaniel's voice was steady. Show us how you would change her behavior. The room seemed to narrow. You want me to what? Guide her, Edward said. Redirect her responses, improve compliance. Eliza shook her head slowly. No, Nathaniel didn't react. Then we proceed without your input. Edward stepped behind the girl, gripping her shoulder. The girl flinched. Eliza felt it like a physical impact. Stop, she said. Edward paused. Or, he asked. Eliza's mind raced. This was the moment. Not a test, a pivot. If she refused completely, they would continue anyway, worse perhaps. If she complied, she swallowed. Let her go, she said carefully. I'll do it. Edward's grip loosened slightly, but he didn't release her. Nathaniel watched closely. Show us. Eliza stepped forward slowly. Every movement felt deliberate, measured. She knelt slightly so she was level with the girl. What's your name? She asked softly. The girl hesitated. Eliza, Nathaniel said. Eliza understood immediately. He wasn't asking, he was instructing. The girl looked at Eliza, confused. Eliza held her gaze. Say your name, she whispered. The girl swallowed. Lena, Nathaniel made a note. Eliza felt it like a blade. Good, she said gently. Lena, look at me. The girl did. Breathe, Eliza said. Slow, like this. She demonstrated. The girl followed, uneven at first, then steadier. Edward watched, intrigued. Nathaniel wrote again. Eliza kept her voice soft. You're safe right now, she said. It wasn't true, but it was necessary. Lena's shoulders lowered slightly. That's it, Eliza said. Stay like that. She turned back to the brothers. Release her. Edward hesitated. Nathaniel nodded once. Edward let go. Lena didn't move. Eliza stayed beside her. That's enough, Nathaniel said after a moment. Eliza stood slowly. Her hands were steady. Inside, nothing was. Edward smiled faintly. See, he said. You're already part of this. Eliza didn't answer. She couldn't, because he was right, and that was the worst part. That night, back in her room, she sat by the window and stared out into the swamp. The air was thick, unmoving. Somewhere in the distance, something cried out, animal or human, she couldn't tell. She thought about the ledger, about the word they had used, subject, and she understood something new. This wasn't just about what they were doing to her. It was about what they were turning her into, and if she wasn't careful, she would become it. The shift was gradual enough that no single moment marked it as a breaking point. That was what made it dangerous. Eliza began spending more time in the cellar, not as a prisoner, but not as anything resembling free either. The distinction blurred quickly. Nathaniel framed it as responsibility. Edward framed it as opportunity. Both meant the same thing. She was being moved closer to the center of whatever this was. At first, her role remained small. Observe, speak. Calm, redirect. She was brought in when others resisted too strongly or withdrew too completely. The brothers watched how her presence altered reactions. They adjusted variables around her, timing, tone, deprivation, reward, and recorded everything. At night, she returned to her room upstairs. The door was still unlocked. That detail never changed, because it didn't need to. The house itself had become the boundary. One evening, as summer heat pressed thick against the walls, Nathaniel placed a new ledger in front of her. This is yours, he said. Eliza didn't touch it. I don't want it. It's not about what you want. Edward leaned against the back of her chair. Think of it as a record of your observations. I'm not writing for you. Nathaniel's gaze didn't waver. You're already thinking in patterns. This simply makes it structured. Eliza looked at the blank pages, clean, waiting. She felt a flicker of something she didn't want to name, not curiosity, something sharper, control. She pushed the ledger back slightly. And if I refuse, Edward's voice came softly near her ear, then we'll write it ourselves. That was the answer. They didn't need her consent, only her participation. Slowly, she pulled the ledger closer. Not because she agreed, because she understood the alternative. That night, her first entry was short. Lena responds to calm tone and direct eye contact. Fear decreases when given simple instructions. She stared at the words after writing them. They looked like his words, not hers, but they were true. That was the problem. Days turned into weeks. The routines deepened. Eliza began noticing things she hadn't before, not just what the brothers did, but how people adapted around them. Small shifts, the way Lena avoided sudden movements, the way the older woman spoke less, conserving energy, choosing silence as a form of resistance. The man with the limp, Isaiah, who watched everything and reacted only when necessary, never more. They weren't passive, they were adjusting, just like she was. One afternoon, Edward joined her in the cellar alone. Nathaniel was away in town. That changed the atmosphere immediately. Edward didn't carry the same rigid structure. He moved through the space with an ease that made everything feel more unpredictable. "You've improved," he said, watching her as she spoke quietly with Lena. "I've adapted," Eliza replied. He smiled slightly. "That's the same thing, depending on perspective." Eliza stood, turning to face him. "You don't believe that?" Edward tilted his head. "No, you don't care about improvement," she said. "You care about control." A pause, then a soft laugh. "That's closer." Eliza crossed her arms. "So what do you want from me?" Edward stepped nearer, lowering his voice. "Honesty. You wouldn't recognize it." "I think I would," he said. "You're already more honest than most." She frowned slightly. "How? You see what this is," he said simply, "and you haven't broken." "That's not honesty," she said. "That's survival." Edward's expression shifted just slightly. "And what's the difference?" he asked. Eliza didn't answer because she wasn't sure anymore. That evening something changed. Nathaniel returned earlier than expected. There was tension in his movements, controlled but present. He called Eliza to the study immediately. Edward followed, unusually quiet. On the desk lay several loose pages, not their ledgers, different, rougher, copied. Eliza felt her chest tighten. "Where did you find these?" Nathaniel asked. She stepped closer, recognizing the handwriting instantly. Isaiah's, careful, compressed, hidden notes, not for them, about them. "I didn't know," she said. Edward watched her closely. Nathaniel picked up one page, descriptions of routines. "Observations of our methods, names, dates." He looked at her. "Someone is documenting us." Silence, heavy, measured. Eliza's mind moved quickly. If they suspected her. "No," she said firmly. "Not me." Edward's eyes narrowed slightly. "We didn't say it was." Nathaniel's gaze didn't leave her face. "But you know who it is." It wasn't a question. Eliza hesitated, a fraction too long. Edward saw it. "There," he said softly. Nathaniel turned toward the cellar door. "Bring him." Eliza's pulse spiked. "No," she said, stepping forward. "You don't need to." Nathaniel's voice cut through hers. "Step aside." She didn't. For the first time, she stood directly in his way, a clear line, a decision. Edward watched, interest returning. Nathaniel's expression hardened, not with anger, but with certainty. "This isn't your decision." Eliza met his gaze. "It is if you want me to keep working with you." A long pause. Edward's eyes flicked between them. Nathaniel studied her carefully. "You're negotiating," he said. "Yes." "On whose behalf?" Eliza didn't look away. "Mine." Edward smiled faintly. "Interesting answer." Nathaniel considered, then slowly. "Step aside." Eliza didn't move. Seconds stretched. Then Nathaniel did something unexpected. He stepped back. "Bring him tomorrow," he said. Eliza exhaled but didn't relax. It wasn't over. It was delayed. That night she went to the cellar. Isaiah was awake. He always was. "They know," she said quietly. He didn't react immediately. "Then how much?" "Enough." Lena looked between them, frightened. The older woman closed her eyes. Isaiah nodded slowly. "Then it's done." "No," Eliza said quickly. "Not yet. We have time." "For what?" he asked. "To decide what happens next." Isaiah studied her. "You think you can control that?" "No," she admitted. "But I can influence it." A faint, tired smile touched his face. "That's what they think too." Eliza stepped closer. "Listen to me. If they take you, it's over for you, for everything you've written." He nodded. "I know." "Then we don't let that happen." "How?" Lena whispered. Eliza looked between them, her mind moving faster than it ever had. "Patterns, options, risks. We change the narrative," she said. Isaiah raised an eyebrow. "Meaning, we give them something else to focus on." The older woman opened her eyes. "At what cost?" Eliza hesitated. That was the question, the one she couldn't fully answer, but she already knew the direction. "Mine," she said quietly. The next day Nathaniel called her to the study again. Alone. Edward was nowhere in sight. That, too, was deliberate. Nathaniel stood by the window, hands behind his back. "Have you considered your position?" he asked. "Yes, and," Eliza stepped forward, "I think you're looking at the wrong person." He turned slowly. "Explain." She forced her voice to stay steady. "You're searching for someone documenting you," she said. "Someone observant, controlled. Capable of seeing patterns." Nathaniel's gaze sharpened. "Yes." Eliza held it. "That's me." Silence, absolute. Nathaniel studied her face. "You're admitting this." "I'm telling you the truth." "Why?" "Because hiding it no longer serves me." A long pause. "Then show me." Eliza reached into her dress, pulled out folded pages. Not Isaiah's, hers. Notes she had written the night before, carefully crafted, accurate enough to be believable, incomplete enough to redirect. Nathaniel took them. Read. Slowly, carefully, when he looked up, something had shifted, not suspicion, recognition. Edward appeared in the doorway. "You didn't tell me we were having a confession," he said lightly. Nathaniel handed him the pages. Edward read. His smile faded slightly, then returned, different this time. "You've been busy," he said. Eliza didn't respond. Nathaniel closed the distance between them. "You understand what this means," he said quietly. "Yes, you've crossed a line, I know, and you chose to." "Yes." Edward looked at her with something close to admiration. "Why?" he asked. Eliza met his gaze. "Because I'd rather define my role than have it defined for me." A beat. Then Edward laughed softly. "She's not wrong." Nathaniel didn't smile, but he didn't disagree. "Very well," he said. He placed the pages on the desk. "You're no longer just a subject." Eliza felt the words settle, heavy, irreversible. "What am I?" she asked. Nathaniel's answer was quiet. "Something more useful," Edward added almost gently, "and far more dangerous." That night back in the cellar, Eliza sat beside Isaiah. "They won't take you," she said. He studied her. "And you?" Eliza looked down at her hands. "They've already taken me," she said. Lena shifted closer to her. "You saved him," she whispered. Eliza didn't answer, because she wasn't sure that was true. She had redirected the threat, changed the focus, but in doing so, she had stepped fully into the role they had been building for her all along. Not just participant, not just observer, but something else. Something that could influence outcomes, shape behavior, alter fate. And in a place like Blackwater House, that kind of power came with a cost, one she was only beginning to understand. After that day, nothing at Blackwater House returned to what it had been. Not for Eliza, not for the others, and not for the Whitlock brothers. The shift was subtle at first, like a current beneath still water, but it changed everything it touched. Eliza was no longer summoned to the cellar. She was expected. There was no instruction anymore, no direct command. Nathaniel simply opened the door and allowed her to walk in first. Edward followed behind, watching not just her actions now, but her decisions. That was the difference. Before, they studied how she reacted. Now they studied what she chose, and that terrified her more than anything they had done before. Because it meant she was no longer just surviving, she was shaping what happened next. The others felt it too. Lena watched her differently, less fear, more dependence. The older woman, Miriam, regarded her with something closer to suspicion. Isaiah said nothing at all, but his silence carried weight. "You've moved," he said one night when they were alone near the far wall of the cellar. "I didn't have a choice," Eliza replied. "There's always a choice." She looked at him sharply. "You think I wanted this? I think you saw an opening," he said calmly, "and you took it." Eliza felt something flare in her chest. "That saved you. For now, that's enough." Isaiah studied her. "Is it?" She didn't answer. Because she didn't know, above them the house had changed as well. Nathaniel became more distant, retreating deeper into his notes, refining what he called models. He spoke less, but when he did, it was with sharper precision, as if every word had been measured before it left his mouth. Edward, on the other hand, became more present, too present. He lingered in doorways, in hallways, in spaces where she didn't expect him. He asked questions that didn't sound like questions. "What do you see when you look at them?" he asked one afternoon as she stood by the cellar entrance. "People," she said. "That's not what I asked." She turned to face him. "Then ask it properly." His smile flickered. "What do you see that we don't?" Eliza hesitated. That was the real question. "They adapt faster than you think," she said finally. Edward's eyes sharpened. "Explain." "You change the environment," she said. "They change themselves to survive it, not the way you expect, not always in ways you can measure." Edward was quiet for a moment, then, "And you?" Eliza held his gaze. "I'm doing the same." That answer stayed with him, she could tell. From that point on, Edward's attention shifted. Less observation, more engagement. He began testing her directly, not with commands, but with situations, small at first, conflicting instructions, incomplete information. Moments where her decision would determine the outcome for someone else. At first she resisted. She tried to avoid choosing, tried to deflect, but the structure didn't allow it. If she didn't act, they would, and their version was always worse. So she began to choose, and each choice carved something out of her. One evening, Nathaniel introduced a new variable, a boy, younger than Lena, no more than 12, terrified. He had been brought in that morning from another property, thin, shaking, eyes darting at every movement. "New subject," Nathaniel said simply. Eliza felt her stomach tighten. Edward watched her reaction closely. "Let's see what you do with him." The boy was placed in the far corner of the cellar, alone, no explanation, no comfort, just space and silence. Eliza stood at the entrance for a long moment, then she walked toward him, slowly, carefully. "I'm not going to hurt you," she said softly. The boy didn't respond, didn't look at her. Eliza knelt a short distance away. "What's your name?" Nothing. Behind her she could feel Edward watching, Nathaniel writing. She closed her eyes briefly, then tried something different. "You don't have to talk," she said, "just listen." The boy's breathing was uneven, fast, fear-driven. Eliza softened her voice further. "You're not alone down here," she said. "There are others. They'll help you." A small shift, barely visible, but it was there. Edward noticed. She knew he did. Minutes passed. Then the boy whispered something too quiet to hear. Eliza leaned slightly closer. "What?" "Jonah," she exhaled slowly. "Okay, Jonah." Behind her, the scratch of Nathaniel's pen grew faster. Edward stepped closer. "Continue," he said. Eliza ignored him. She kept her focus on the boy. "Stay where you are," she said gently. "You don't have to move. Just breathe." Jonah nodded faintly. It was small, but it was something. When she stood, Edward's expression had changed, not amusement, something deeper. "You're effective," he said. Eliza didn't answer. Nathaniel closed his ledger. "More than effective," he said quietly. "Predictive." That word lingered. Predictive. They weren't just watching outcomes anymore. They were trying to anticipate them. Through her, that night, Eliza couldn't sleep. She sat by the window again, staring into the swamp. But this time the silence felt different, heavier, closer. She thought about Jonah, about Lena, about Isaiah, about the way they looked at her now, not just with fear, with expectation. And that was worse, because it meant they believed she could do something, change something, fix something, and she wasn't sure that was true. The next day everything fractured. It started with something small, a mistake. Jonah panicked during one of Nathaniel's controlled interactions, flinched too hard, knocked over a lantern, nearly started a fire. Nathaniel reacted immediately, sharp, cold. "Remove him." Edward moved without hesitation. Jonah cried out, struggling. Eliza stepped forward instinctively. "Wait." Nathaniel didn't look at her. "He's unstable." "He's scared," she said. "Same thing," Edward replied. "No," Eliza said firmly. "Not if you give him time." Nathaniel turned then, slowly. "You're intervening." "Yes." "Based on what?" Eliza met his gaze. "Observation." A long pause. Then Nathaniel said something that changed everything. "Then you decide." The room went still. Edward looked at him, surprised. "Brother." Nathaniel didn't take his eyes off Eliza. "You believe he can be stabilized," he said. "Then he's your responsibility." Eliza felt the weight of it immediately. "And if I'm wrong?" she asked. Nathaniel's voice was quiet. "Then we proceed as planned." She didn't need him to explain what that meant. Edward watched her carefully. "This is what you wanted," he said softly. No, it wasn't, but it was what she had created. Eliza looked at Jonah, terrified, shaking, waiting. She swallowed. "I'll handle it," she said. Nathaniel nodded once. Edward stepped back. Jonah was released. He stumbled toward her instinctively. Eliza steadied him. "Come with me," she said quietly. She led him to the far side of the cellar, away from the others, away from the brothers, or as far as that was possible. For the next hours she stayed with him, spoke to him, calmed him, taught him how to breathe, how to focus, how to survive the structure around him. Not to break, not to disappear, but to endure. Above them, Nathaniel and Edward observed. Waited, measured, and for the first time they didn't intervene. That was the shift. They were no longer controlling every variable. They were letting her do it, and that made her something new, not free, not equal, but central. That night Isaiah found her again. "You're in it now," he said. Eliza didn't deny it. "I know." "And when it fails?" he asked. She looked at him. "It won't." Isaiah held her gaze. "That's what they think too." Eliza felt the words settle deep. Because she understood something now that she hadn't before. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about outcomes, about who lived, who broke, who disappeared. And every decision she made pulled her further into the same system she had once only tried to endure. Upstairs, Edward stood in the hallway outside her room that night. He didn't knock, didn't speak, just stood there for a long moment before leaving, because he saw it too. The change. And unlike Nathaniel, Edward didn't just want to understand it. He wanted to see how far it could go. By the winter of 1861, Blackwater House had become something else entirely. Not just a plantation, not just a place of control, but a system that no longer depended solely on the men who created it. That was the part none of them said aloud. Not Nathaniel, not Edward, and not Eliza. The structure now moved through her as much as it moved around her. Decisions passed through her hands before they became action. Reactions bent in response to her presence. The cellar, once a place of confinement, had become a space of quiet negotiation. Fear still lived there, but it shifted, adjusted, breathed differently. Jonah no longer trembled at every sound. Lena spoke more, though carefully. Miriam still watched with that same guarded suspicion. And Isaiah watched Eliza, not with fear, not with trust, but with something harder, recognition. "You think you've changed it," he said one evening. Eliza didn't look up from where she sat near the wall, Jonah asleep beside her. "I've made it better. For who?" She hesitated. That was the question that never had a clean answer. "For them," she said finally. Isaiah's gaze didn't soften. "And for yourself," Eliza met his eyes. "I'm still here, aren't I?" He didn't respond. He didn't need to, because they both understood what that meant. Upstairs, the tension between the brothers had begun to surface. It wasn't loud. Not arguments, not shouting, something quieter, more dangerous. Nathaniel had become increasingly rigid, his notes more detailed, his methods sharper. He still believed in control, absolute, structured, predictable. Edward, however, had shifted. He no longer asked what could be controlled, he asked what could be influenced. And that difference, small on the surface, cut deeper with each passing day. "She's not following your structure anymore," Edward said one night in the study, his voice low but steady. Nathaniel didn't look up from his ledger. "She is the structure." Edward smiled faintly. "That's the problem." Nathaniel's pen paused. "For you, perhaps." Edward stepped closer to the desk. "You're trying to define her, fix her in place, but she's not static." Nathaniel closed the ledger slowly. "Nothing is." "Then stop treating her like it is." A silence followed, heavy. Measured, Nathaniel stood. "You're getting distracted." Edward's expression sharpened. "No," he said, "I'm seeing what you're missing." "And what is that?" Edward's voice lowered. "She's not just adapting to us, a beat, she's changing us." That landed. Nathaniel didn't respond immediately, but something in his posture shifted. Barely, but enough. Downstairs, Eliza felt the change before she understood it. The next day, Nathaniel altered the structure again. No warning, no explanation. Jonah was removed from the cellar, taken upstairs. Eliza followed immediately. "What are you doing?" she demanded. Nathaniel didn't answer right away. Edward stood nearby, watching both of them. Finally, Nathaniel spoke. "You've demonstrated influence," he said. "Now we test its limits." Eliza stepped closer. "He stays where he is." "No," Nathaniel said calmly. "He moves. He's not ready. That's your assessment." "Yes." Nathaniel looked at her directly. "Then prove it." Eliza felt the trap close around her. "This isn't a test," she said. "It's exactly a test," Edward interrupted quietly. She turned to him. "You know what this will do to him." Edward didn't deny it. "That's the point." Eliza looked back at Nathaniel. "If he breaks, then your method fails," Nathaniel said, "and we adjust." Eliza's hands clenched. "You're not adjusting people, you're destroying them." Nathaniel's expression didn't change. "And yet," he said, "you've kept several from breaking." The words hit harder than she expected, because they were true. That was the trap. That was always the trap. She stepped back slightly. "Put him back," she said, quieter now. Nathaniel didn't move. Eliza's voice dropped further. "If you want me to continue working with you, put him back." Silence. Edward watched, interest sharpening again. Nathaniel considered. Longer this time, then. "No," the word settled like a stone. Something inside Eliza shifted, not slowly, not gradually, all at once. "You're making a mistake," she said. Nathaniel's gaze hardened. "No," he said, "you are. You're forgetting your position." Eliza met his eyes, and for the first time she didn't see authority, she saw limitation. "You think this is still about position," she said quietly. Edward's breath caught just slightly. Nathaniel didn't react. But he was listening. "It isn't," Eliza continued. "It hasn't been for a long time." Nathaniel stepped closer. "Explain." Eliza's voice remained steady. "You built this place on control," she said, "but control doesn't last, it changes. It moves." She gestured slightly toward the cellar. "Down there, they're not the same people you started with." A glance toward Edward. "And neither are you." Edward didn't look away. Nathaniel's expression tightened. "And you?" he asked. Eliza held his gaze. "I'm not what you think I am either." The silence that followed was different from all the others. Not measured, not controlled, uncertain. Nathaniel studied her as if seeing something for the first time. Edward watched like he had been waiting for this moment. "You're overestimating your influence," Nathaniel said finally. "No," Eliza replied, "you're underestimating it." A long pause, then Edward spoke softly. "She's right." Nathaniel turned sharply toward him. "You don't believe that." Edward smiled faintly. "I do." The room shifted, lines drawn not clearly but enough. Nathaniel looked between them, then back at Eliza. "Very well," he said. He gestured toward Jonah. "Take him." Eliza didn't move at first, then slowly she stepped forward, took Jonah's hand, led him back toward the cellar. No one stopped her. That was the moment everything changed, not loudly. Not dramatically, but completely, because for the first time Nathaniel had given way, and Edward had allowed it. Days passed after that in a strange, fragile balance. No new subjects were brought in, no drastic changes. The structure held but barely. Tension lingered in every room, every hallway, every silence. Eliza felt it constantly, like something waiting to break. It happened on a storm-heavy night in early October. Thunder rolled across the swamp. Rain hammered against the windows, the kind of storm that swallowed sound, that erased edges, that made things possible. Eliza was in the cellar when she heard it, shouting, upstairs, sharp, uncontrolled. She moved immediately. By the time she reached the study, the door was open. Edward stood near the desk, Nathaniel across from him, both tense, both still. "You're losing control," Edward was saying. Nathaniel's voice was low. "I'm maintaining structure. At what cost? At necessary cost." Edward shook his head. "No," he said, "at your cost, not theirs." Nathaniel's eyes flicked toward the doorway, toward Eliza. Edward followed his gaze and smiled faintly. "Well," he said softly, "here she is." Eliza stepped inside. "What's happening?" Neither answered immediately. Then Nathaniel spoke. "This ends tonight." The words landed hard. "How?" Eliza asked. "By restoring order." She understood instantly. "No," Edward's expression shifted, almost regretful. "It was inevitable," he said. Eliza looked between them. "You can't just—" "We can," Nathaniel interrupted. "And we will." He moved toward the door. Eliza stepped in front of him. "No," the word came sharp, final. Nathaniel stopped. "You don't decide that." Eliza didn't move. "Neither do you." For a moment everything hung there, balanced. Then Edward moved, not toward Eliza, toward Nathaniel, a single step. Subtle but enough, Nathaniel saw it, and something in his expression changed. Not anger, not surprise, understanding, cold, clear. "So that's where you stand," he said. Edward didn't answer. He didn't need to. The storm outside intensified. Thunder cracked close enough to shake the walls, and in that moment the system broke. What happened next was never fully recorded. The accounts that survived are fragmented, contradictory, incomplete. Some say there was violence. Others say it was quieter than that choices were made in silence rather than force. What is known is this: before dawn, a fire started in the lower level of Blackwater House. It spread quickly, too quickly for accident. By the time neighbors arrived hours later, the structure was collapsing in on itself. The cellar was gone, the ledgers destroyed, the rooms reduced to ash. 3 bodies were recovered from the wreckage, identities uncertain, unconfirmed, unrecorded. Of Eliza there was no official trace, no name in the parish logs, no entry in the ledgers that survived, nothing. But months later, in a small abolitionist circle far to the north, a packet of documents appeared, detailed, precise. Written in careful, controlled script, descriptions of Blackwater House, of the brothers, of the system they built, and of how it unraveled. At the end of those pages, one final line: "Control is not permanent. It only changes hands." No signature, no date, just that. Some believe Eliza wrote it. Others say it was Isaiah, or someone else entirely. But the records office fire in Red Hollow Parish later that year erased what little remained. Names disappeared, dates blurred, truth reduced to fragments, and what happened at Blackwater House became something else. Not history, not rumor, but something in between. A story about power, about survival. And about what happens when the line between victim and architect disappears completely.